On a cool, grey April morning in 2009, a group of students from a modest primary school in Lyon found themselves standing at the threshold of Paris, their eyes wide with anticipation. The city, cloaked in low clouds and the promise of spring rain, seemed to hum with possibility. Among the children was Carolina, 8 years old, her light brown hair falling in gentle waves around her face, a battered sketchbook always pressed to her chest. She was a quiet child, the kind whose presence was often felt more in the soft rustle of paper than in words. Her teachers, fond but sometimes perplexed, would say she spoke little, but when she did, it was to ask about the great painters or to share her own whispered stories, spun from the images she saw in old canvases. The day's adventure was to be a visit to the Louvre, that grand palace of art and history. The students filed through the vast marble halls, their footsteps echoing beneath soaring ceilings. Paintings by masters, Da Vinci, Delacroix, Géricault, gazed down with silent authority. Carolina, her hand entwined with her best friend's, moved through the galleries in a kind of reverent awe, her eyes drinking in every detail, her mind alive with imagined worlds behind the painted faces. By midday, the group paused for lunch in the museum's bustling cafeteria. Laughter and chatter filled the air, the children's excitement undimmed by the long morning. Afterward, they gathered in the Denon wing, preparing to see the museum's most famous treasures. The teachers counted heads, shepherding their charges like precious cargo. But in the space of a heartbeat, Carolina was gone. One moment, she stood in line with her classmates, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. The next, she had vanished. At first, there was confusion, then growing alarm as the minutes passed. Security was alerted, the exits were sealed. Museum staff, police, and teachers scoured every gallery, every corridor, calling her name. There were no cries for help, no overturned benches, no sign of struggle. Even her sketchbook was missing, as though she had been gently erased from the world. Hours stretched into days. Flyers bearing her photograph, taken just days before, her face serious and hopeful, were plastered across Paris. A hotline was set up and calls poured in, most leading nowhere. Her parents, Clara and Vincent, left their home in Lyon and wandered the city's streets, searching for their daughter's face in the crowds. But Carolina had disappeared without a trace, as if she had stepped out of time. The story gripped the nation. Newspapers dubbed it the Louvre Mystery, and television anchors speculated endlessly. Theories abounded, some wild, some chilling, but none brought Carolina home. As weeks turned to months, the media attention faded, but Clara and Vincent's hope did not. They returned to Lyon, carrying with them the weight of their unanswered questions and the ache of their daughter's empty room. Years passed. The world moved on, but the pain lingered, a dull throb beneath the surface of ordinary days. 14 years later, in the early summer of 2023, a young woman was arrested in Marseille after attempting to shoplift a paperback from a quiet bookstore. She gave a false name, had no identification, and spoke perfect French, though her accent was subtly strange, familiar, yet elusive. In the police station, she remained unnervingly calm, her composure at odds with her situation. When her fingerprints revealed nothing, an officer, guided by intuition, ran her details through a database of missing persons. A name surfaced: Carolina Marek, vanished from the Louvre in April 2009, aged 8. The officer stared at the screen, then at the woman in custody. The resemblance was uncanny. The same almond-shaped eyes, the gentle curve of her jaw, the small mole above her left eyebrow. When asked if she was Carolina, the young woman nodded. "That's the name they gave me when I was little," she said softly. "I haven't used it in years." The revelation sent shockwaves through the authorities. The case was reopened with urgency, and Carolina agreed to speak, but only with a social worker present. What she told them unraveled a story far stranger and more heartbreaking than anyone had guessed. On the day she disappeared, Carolina recounted, a woman approached her near a quiet hallway in the Louvre. She wore a navy blazer and a warm smile, like a member of the museum staff. She asked Carolina if she wanted to see a secret painting, one not shown to the public. At 8, swept up in wonder, Carolina followed her without hesitation. The woman led her through a service corridor, then out a discreet back entrance. Within minutes, Carolina was in a car, speeding away from the museum and everything she knew. She remembered crying, begging to go back, but the woman, whom she would come to know as Margot, gave her a piece of candy and told her she was going on a special adventure. Carolina's new life was one of constant motion. She lived in Toulouse, then Nice, and finally Marseille. Margot changed their names frequently, weaving elaborate stories. She told Carolina that her parents had abandoned her, that the world outside was dangerous, and that people who asked questions could never be trusted. Carolina was homeschooled, rarely allowed outside, her world reduced to a handful of rooms and Margot's shifting moods. In time, Carolina stopped resisting. She buried her memories, learned to survive. But something inside her never settled. She dreamed of museums, of hands pulling her away, of a sketchbook lost, and a name she could barely recall. At 14, she began to question Margot's stories. Margot punished her, and they moved again. At 16, Carolina tried to escape. Margot found her and tightened her grip. When Carolina turned 22, she found work cleaning houses. One day, she stumbled upon a book of Monet's paintings. For reasons she couldn't explain, she began to cry. That night, she packed a small bag and left, her heart pounding with fear and hope. She wandered the city, uncertain, until her arrest for shoplifting, a desperate, thoughtless act that became her salvation. News of Carolina's discovery spread quickly. For most, it was an incredible story, a mystery solved, a lost child found. But for Clara and Vincent, it was a phone call before dawn. A Paris police officer's quiet words. "We believe we've found your daughter." They drove through the night to Marseille, the silence between them heavy with grief and trembling hope. At the police station, they were warned not to expect miracles. "She's a woman now," the officer said gently. "She's been through things you can't imagine." Carolina sat in a small, bare room, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes downcast. When the door opened and Clara entered, neither moved at the first. 14 years compressed into a single breathless moment. Then, Vincent stepped in, and Carolina looked up. Tears welled in her eyes, and though no words were spoken, a spark of recognition passed between them. A fragile thread connecting past and present. The reunion was tentative, raw, imperfect. Carolina remembered little of her early childhood. Her parents had aged, their hair tinged with grey, their faces marked by years of sorrow. But their voices, gentle and familiar, stirred something deep within her. They showed her the drawings she had made as a child, the stuffed elephant she had slept with, the pink sweater she wore the day she disappeared. Carolina touched each item as if asking permission to remember. Margot was arrested a week later in a quiet suburb near Aix-en-Provence. She was charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, and psychological abuse. In her first interrogation, she insisted she had saved Carolina from a broken home, but the police found no evidence to support this claim. What they did find were forged documents, dozens of false identities, and a diary filled with obsessive entries about control and love. Margot was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Carolina chose not to attend the trial. She didn't need to hear Margot's justifications. Instead, she began therapy, supported by her parents and a foundation dedicated to helping victims of long-term abduction. Healing was slow. Some nights, she woke in terror, unsure if she was still trapped. Other days, she found herself smiling at small joys, a fresh croissant with her father, an old film with her mother, the sound of rain tapping at her window. For months, she avoided museums. The memories were too raw, the pain too close. But one quiet afternoon, she stood outside the Louvre, the building where her life had changed forever. She waited, steadying herself, then stepped inside. The halls were unchanged, the paintings silent sentinels. Carolina walked among them, no longer afraid. She paused before a painting by Delacroix, the one her teachers had once said was her favorite. She couldn't recall why she had loved it as a child, but now she understood. The chaos, the color, the woman in the center holding a flag, defiant, unbroken. Carolina stood there, letting the image wash over her. Her parents didn't try to erase the past. They understood that some wounds never fully heal, but they also knew that love, though delayed by years of silence and loss, could find its voice again. They moved to a small town near Marseille, not far from where Carolina was rebuilding her life. They took it slow, dinners once a week, walks by the sea, birthdays celebrated quietly, without candles at first. Carolina enrolled in a university art program. She didn't want to be an artist, she explained, but she wanted to understand what had once made her feel safe. Gradually, her sketches returned, lines blossoming into faces, into memories. She was no longer drawing to escape, she was drawing to remember. Some stories don't end with neat answers. Carolina never learned exactly why Margot chose her or how she managed to slip past security, but the details mattered less than the life she was reclaiming. She had been taken from the world, hidden in silence. Now, she was choosing to live in it again. Justice for Carolina was not about revenge. It was about return. And love, though paused for years, had been waiting, patient, enduring, ready to begin again.